can't turn your head.
I mean, I get by.
That's not really the same thing. I'm 29, and I work as a logistics coordinator at a container yard, which sounds more structured than it is, because in practice it means I'm the person who knows where everything is, where it was before that, and why the numbers on Tuesday's manifest don't match what's sitting in Bay 4 right now. I do all of that under the same job title I had when I started, which never got updated when the woman before me left, and her entire workload quietly folded itself into mine like a piece of paper that no one saw anyone fold. There are 3 of us in the yard. Me, the supervisor, who is 45, and the counterpart, who is 28, and operates the forklift and handles warehouse floor work. The 3 of us share an office that is really just a converted storage room with a window that faces the wrong direction. The woman who had this role before me, the same chair, the same login credentials, the same pending documentation backlog, had left on stress leave after something happened between her and the counterpart. What I was told about that when I came on was not very much, just that she had taken leave, that the situation had been handled, and that I should let them know if I had any concerns. I nodded the way you nod when you understand that the sentence means roughly the opposite of what it sounds like, and then I went and started learning the filing system, which turned out to have significant gaps that nobody had flagged. I slowly began patching those gaps without announcing I was doing it, because announcing things in that office had a way of turning into a conversation I didn't want to have.
You want the last one, or are you saving yourself?
I'm fine.
Right, yeah, you're always fine. I know a guy over at the Fremantle Depot, if you ever need a contact there, just saying.
I'll keep that in mind.
Most people would.
The counterpart left nicotine pouches on the shared desk, which bothered me less as a habit and more as a spatial claim, the way you can tell someone has decided a shared surface is theirs without them ever saying so. He had a way of discussing his connections in the industry, people he knew, favours owed to him, things he could arrange, that existed at a frequency just vague enough that you couldn't really push back on any specific claim. I found early on that if I said very little, the conversation would complete itself without requiring my participation. That worked fine until the morning he came in to make coffee, stood there for a moment without speaking, and then turned round and said something about me being a quiet one, in a tone that suggested the silence was something I was doing to him personally. You can't turn your head.
I mean, I get by.
That's not really the same thing.
Old thing, honestly, doesn't come up most days.
Okay, there was one thing I keep coming back to. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was specific in a way that small things usually aren't. One afternoon, the counterpart mentioned offhandedly, in that same floating, unclaimed way he mentioned most things, that he couldn't really do full neck rotation anymore. That something had happened. An old thing, nothing serious, just one of those injuries that had never fully resolved. He said it while reaching for something on the top shelf, and I noticed that he did move his whole torso instead of just turning his head. He said it with the same casual energy he said everything, so I filed it with all the other things I was filing and kept going.
Look, I had a word with him. He knows where I stand on it.
Is that going in the file?
We don't need to make it bigger than it is.
Right.
These things sort themselves out if you don't keep poking at them.
Sure. The supervisor had a long-standing pattern, and I understood it well enough by month 2. Things got noted, but not documented. Conversations happened, but paperwork didn't follow. Write-ups were discussed in the abstract more often than they were written. This had a specific texture to it that wasn't laziness exactly, more like a kind of institutional optimism, the belief that if you gave something enough informal room it would resolve. Sometimes it did. Sometimes you ended up with a backlog of undocumented incidents and a shared office where the previous coordinator had eventually stopped coming in.
Lane's clear, I already checked.
When did you check?
Before I started, relax.
Just keep the reversals short, same as always.
Yeah, same as always.
There was a morning, ordinary, the same diesel hum from the lane that always became background within about 4 minutes of arriving, when the forklift was running reversals in the main lane, which is routine, except that the hum didn't pause the way it usually does between passes. I was inside pulling a report and registered it the way you register something in the background of a phone call you're not fully paying attention to. Then there was a sound that wasn't the hum, and wasn't not the hum, and wasn't anything I had a quick name for. Then things stopped being background. What came through in the aftermath, through the chat, through the supervisor's face when he came back inside, through the quality of the phone calls that started happening, was that the forklift had reversed 250 feet without adequate visibility, that there had been a collision, and that the first thing the counterpart said in the immediate aftermath, before anything about the equipment, before anything about the space, was something about why he hadn't been able to turn his head properly, which was the first time his undisclosed neck condition became a thing that existed in official space rather than a thing he had mentioned sideways on an afternoon nobody had noted down. What the investigation turned over slowly was not just whether the counterpart would be let go, but the longer question nobody wanted to say as a full sentence, about how a position with full rotational requirements had been assigned to someone whose own account of the incident was about the specific thing he couldn't physically do, and whether the paperwork that should have caught that had ever existed in any form that anyone could now locate. The counterpart was gone from the yard before I processed the full shape of what had been assembled, and then quietly not assembled around him for the months prior. The supervisor came back eventually and took over the forklift rotation himself in the interim. I kept coordinating, cross-referencing, patching the gaps in the filing system that kept appearing the way they always had. The sealed envelope from the wage review, the one hand-delivered that Tuesday, parked 250 feet from the bay entrance while the forklift was running reversals in that same lane, is still somewhere in my bag, I think. Or maybe I put it in the desk drawer, and I can't remember now if I ever actually opened it.